So once upon a time, the world looked down upon Chinese technology companies. They were considered to be copycats, imitators, appropriator, rather than innovator. So that was true. The copying was shameless and ruthless. What was Facebook was first on campus, 校内, which became 人人, which is everybody. Groupon was the darling startup in Silicon Valley for a long period of time. It was a group buying business. Meituan, the Chinese copy, is called Group Beautiful. Yahoo became Sohu, with So being search, and YouTube became Youku, the exact identical copies of their American counterparts. So while the rest of the world sneered, China was actually rapidly catching up. So today, China has the fastest supercomputer in the world. Its digital payments market is 50 times larger than that of the US. China's 500-meter wide radio telescope has joined the global search for extraterritorial life. Huawei became the biggest issuer of new international patents. And out of the top 10 unicorns, 7 are Chinese. Out of the top 20, half of them are Chinese. Now, this one is just the ones that were the previous unicorns. Of the 5, 4 were Chinese. So the revolution, technological revolution, is happening in China. And I find this very interesting because it is actually the first time in history that a developing country with only 25% of GDP per capita of the US is actually at the cutting edge of technology and leading it in many aspects. So there are 3 common explanations for why that is, for China's success. The common explanations are protectionism, government protectionism, or outright theft, or cheap labor. Now, all of these things happened, but none of it is true. None of it is the real explanation driving China's technological boom. The 2 real reasons are the following. The first is competition, the brutality and savagery of competition, and of the most ferocious kind. So Meituan, I mentioned this group buying business, now valued at $30 billion, while, by the way, Groupon is basically nothing more than a shell today, is 1 out of 5,000 group buying businesses. Alibaba, of course, which was the exact copy of eBay, but kicked out eBay eventually, was 1 of 12,000 e-commerce platforms. Today, online lending is all the rage, and Dai is 1 of 6,000 P2P platforms that are ferociously competing with each other. Imitation is very easy in China. They relentlessly copied each other. They drove prices down to the ground. They deinstalled each other's softwares. They even sent each other's CEO to the police. That's how competition works in China. So this is, from this bloodshedding gladiatorial stadium, actually emerged the most robust business models and the most resilient entrepreneurs because of competition. Now, I think this is very interesting because we usually think there's imitation, the stage of imitation, and then there's a stage of innovation. Somehow one country managed to transition from being an imitator to an innovator. But the fact of the matter is, in China, the easy and ferocious imitation actually caused innovation. It led to innovation because competition forced companies to constantly innovate, constantly tweak their business models, endlessly iterate their products, invent new monetization models, and build very high barriers of entry so that you're protected. Now, when you're in the Silicon Valley, uncontested, where copying is really frowned upon and not the typical practice, well, it's better and more comfortable to not have that pressure and change. So I think that the best way to capture this idea is, as always, there are three choices in life. The first, of course, is to be lounging in your chair on a vacation and doing nothing. The second choice is to cannibalize yourself. And the third choice is to be cannibalized by somebody else. Now, when 3 is never possible, then you're always going to choose 1 over 2, right? When you're in a comfortable position and you don't have that competition, you always choose 1. When 3 is actually a living reality, well, then it's better to choose 2 rather than choose 3. And so that is the spirit of the Chinese internet ecosystem, constantly changing, constantly innovating so that they can survive. That's the first factor. Now, for instance, that imitation led to a lot of innovation. Now, WeChat is a great example. For those of you who don't have WeChat, I recommend downloading it, trying it out. It is actually a combination of all these things. It's a combination of Skype, WhatsApp, PayPal, Facebook, Twitter, all on one platform, and it works incredibly well. And so those people who thought that Chinese were always just innovating, well, think again. They are constantly coming up with new features and new models and optimizing their product, expanding their product lines and optimizing their business models and adapting. The second factor leading to China's success, which has been unconventional, is by having no burden of tradition. Now, there's a concept called economic backwardness that I like to go to. Alexander Gershenkraun is an economic historian. And the notion is that actually by starting behind and backward in 1980, you're able to leapfrog further by 2020. Now, Beijing, where I come from, has a fantastic airport, highways, roads. When in 1990, it was virtually in shambles or non-existent. Now, no one admires, I think, no one admires the Kennedy Airport in New York, but actually it was a decent airport in 1980. So it kind of just kludged its way along and didn't need to change. In China, most people don't have access to traditional banking system. So they went straight to online banking. Now, Alipay, which is one of the largest unicorns, the financial arm of Alibaba, has this massive online lending to small companies, to households, to rural people. And it gives you loans much cheaper, much faster, with a 2% default rate. Now, when you're in the rural area in China, you don't even have banks, in your vicinity. You go straight to online lending. And actually, research has found that you have a 40% increase in the likelihood of becoming an entrepreneur through these and financial platforms of online lending. So actually, fintech is not only closing the urban-rural gap, it's also reducing inequality at a rapid pace. So when a country is without the burden of tradition, entrenched systems, and legacy, it is actually easier to adopt innovation. When you don't have to break things down before you build them up again, it is easier to move forward because dismantling things is costly. Renovating something is more difficult than starting from scratch. So China doesn't have the burden of tradition, but it's actually also able to escape any tradition that it has. And the first way of doing that is actually by having a different kind of tradition, and that's the tradition of dysfunctionality. If stuff just doesn't work well in the real world, in the physical economy, then that gives more room for the efficiency gains provided by digital economy and the internet economy. So the financial system in China is a mess, unreliable. Households don't really have access to it. And this gives fintech the space to improve at basically escapade velocity. So the tradition of dysfunctionality actually helped China escape the burden of tradition. And the second advantage is the capacity to scale. When you have the opportunity to scale, tradition recedes in the face of explosive growth. When there is no scale, tradition and legacy prevail and tend to linger. So here is this example, or these are some of the facts of the capacity to scale and the mobile penetration in China. 772 million internet users, 55.8% penetration rate, internet, and still growing. The new generation, most of them are online. Of course, we have 1.3 billion people. Smartphones, 717 million users. Mobile internet, 753 million users. Mobile payment, 527 million users, et cetera, higher than most countries in the rest of the world. So that is the capacity to scale, which helps you escape economic backwardness. And of course, going forward, China is investing a lot, of course, in artificial intelligence. With policy ease, the government support, this is a big data industry. So the more data you have, the more advantage that you will have as well. And that is also another advantage of scale. China has risen by defying conventional wisdom. So let me give you two unconventional thoughts to conclude as a summary for what I think has driven China's success. Now, the first is that we usually think about intellectual property protection as a key factor to promote innovation, because that gives you the incentive, that gives the people incentive to innovate because they can harness their profits. Well, actually, China has proven that that's not necessarily the case. More limited protection of intellectual property is not a failing of capitalism per se, but actually may be a contributor to progress. And the second and last is that, as in many other things, it is actually potentially far better to be leading from behind.